Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Caitlin, the founder and managing partner of Avalanche VC. We invest in the earliest institutional rounds in companies that transform how people learn, earn, and own. This series is co-hosted with ECMC's Education Impact Fund, a $300 million asset manager focused on driving impact in post-secondary education outcomes. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce Justin Wenig, the co-founder and former CEO of CourseDog that he founded from his dorm room in Colombia and grew to exit to private equity earlier this year. And he now is on to his second company in the government and education procurement space. We're excited for this conversation. We're going to learn about how Justin built CourseDog into a go-to-market machine in higher ed and what his tips and tricks are of going through RFP processes to sell to governments and higher ed institutions. So excited to have you here with us today, Justin.
Thanks so much for having me, Caitlin. Much appreciated. Feel free to make this interactive. So if folks have questions, feel free to use the chat. Really want to use today predominantly to share some tidbits from my experience going from newbie to veteran of this space. I'll give it to you to kick it off if you want to ask questions, and feel free to jump in, folks in the audience, with questions as well.
Yeah, I think I gave people a tidbit of your backstory, but I'd love to hear, why did you found CourseDog? Like, why selling to academic institutions? Like, how did you get here?
Yeah, for sure. A little bit about my background. About 6.5 years ago, I was a junior at Columbia University, and I got really frustrated while trying to enroll in the computer science classes that I wanted to get into, which sent me on a wild goose chase of trying to understand the way that universities, mostly kind of public universities and also state Department of Educations, handled some of these kind of back office budgeting, scheduling, academic operations processes. And literally went from, I still remember probably around 3 or 4 months into the company, we had these really high fidelity Figma mockups, but we had not written any code. My co-founder and I basically could not code. I had been a CS intern at Facebook. We had no server. I remember being on these back-to-back calls with public universities and like state systems, showing them how our software, I remember there was this like big optimize button, and you like click the optimize button. There was this fake loading bar. And then I remember they'd be like, this is awesome. And that was my foray into backing into, okay, how do you actually figure out what folks want? And then obviously was really fortunate over the last 6.5 years, went through Y Combinator, raised a little venture capital, and built CourseDog to tens of millions of dollars of annual revenue, sold the company for 9 figures, did a majority transaction. I'm still very involved on the board with a private equity firm, hoping that I can share some of the crazy, weird tips that I learned along the way with folks to the extent that it's useful.
What was it like in those like early days? Higher ed institutions can be so difficult to get in front of. They can be a little cynical. Yet at Pearson, there used to be this quote, which is, everyone has a veto, no one has a mandate. How'd you get around that?
I think the number one thing that I always tell founders is, in these markets like education and GovTech, buyers are actually really transparent about what their problems are if you get in front of them. And the number one challenge for most companies is just, how do they get in front of buyers? I see a lot of companies dilly-dally. They'll go to a conference here and maybe they'll send a cold email there. My co-founder and I, junior summer, after we had spent 5 months not talking to enough buyers, we said, we're going to do a little challenge. The challenge was we would lock ourselves in a room for 6 hours a day, only with bathroom breaks. During those 6 hours, all we would do was make cold calls. Like, we literally said to ourselves, we just have to hit the phones. And I really mean it. Like, we spent the 6 months before that spinning our wheels talking about academic operations and budgeting and whatever it was. And I really think 2 weeks into making 6 hours a day of cold calls, it was so obvious. Like, we would go, we'd ask these questions, we'd say, what were the problems with the back office operations? What were the problems with the budgeting? What's the problems with the scheduling? And like, the amount of pain and insight was so clear. The number one thing I would say to a lot of folks is, you have to put yourself in a position to understand the buyers. And the best way to understand the buyers is through volume of calls and emails. To me, the number one predictor of success in the space is, can you actually understand the buyers and put in the work to understand the buyers? Very quickly thereafter, we transitioned from that discovery, from understanding, to, again, it was really intuitive. Like, anyone could have read the Google Doc notes and been like, oh, this sucks and this sucks. We need to piece this together. Then we went into more of a wireframing phase, and something that I think is actually non-intuitive about a lot of these markets. People from the outside would think governments, educational institutions, K-12 higher ed, they're not open to being early adopters. They're not open to non-fleshed out solutions. And there's a kernel of truth in that these folks inherently and necessarily all of the incentive structure is set up to be more risk averse. But on the flip side, my experience was, and what many founders that I've seen that have come up over the last 5 years and built companies from 0 to 1 is you would be shocked by how many founders make millions of dollars of sales with extremely early stage prototype products. And one of the things that we did quite well by virtue of us not being incredible programmers at the time was that we were basically forced to do incredible high fidelity prototypes, Figma mockups to validate demand. The number one thing I tell a lot of founders, if you can't sell the prototype, the answer is not that these buyers are risk averse and the market's hard to sell to. Honestly, you might not have a valuable enough pain point, because I was shocked. We had over $1 million in contracts with some of the largest institutions in the country where we had no references, where they didn't have to demo or try the product, where it was the earliest of the early stage. I think prototype validation is super important. I think as it pertains to scaling up, there's a couple of high level things that are important to understand about the ideal customer profile. In these spaces, the best way to learn it is, again, by hitting the phones, getting on email. But I think something that oftentimes is a mistake that early stage companies make is they have this really outside in perspective of, okay, in government, what can I do to make the constituents' life better? And what can I do to make the students' life better? And that should inform the mission. It should be at the root of what keeps you motivated. A much better way, in my opinion, to reason through these is to deeply understand the challenges of the public servants, the folks who are serving the students, the folks that are serving the constituents, and to reason out through that into how you can help them to ultimately really help the students, right? One thing I really strongly recommend to folks is it's really important first, like 99% of early stage ideas in GovTech and in education, in my opinion, die because of this outside in reasoning. Someone says, if I were in the constituent perspective, if I were in the student perspective, here is what would suck for me. And then they take that and try to reason that into an administrator's problem. The administrator's problem is they're telling me it's the same problem. The student experience sucks, or I pick up the phone, there's not an AI voice. And my strong feedback to many folks is that if you go to that administrator and ask them what their top problems are, and you're not on that list, you're reasoning into something, you're getting people to give you false positives. It's probably not something that they're really going to be willing to put their budgets toward. And so that was another insight. And then a final insight, and then I'll pause, was I think that a lot of folks misunderstand the way that these governments and universities buy, like what the procurement process is actually. And I'll give a couple of mini tidbits about this. One is that I think pricing is the best vehicle for validation, and you selling a really small product to some government or some university in general is really poor validation of your thesis. Governments and universities sometimes get grants. K-12 schools sometimes get grants. Small purchases are not good validations. In my opinion, what I've seen in my own experience is that anytime a founder in an early stage company is able to get true mid-market or enterprise price, more than $15K a year, $20K a year on their first contract, it's a real company. If that's not the case, it's not a real company. The other thing to note about these procurement processes is that governments and schools are very risk averse. And so what that means is that you don't win yourself any favors by going in and saying, oh, I'm the cheapest solution on the market. Conversely, my experience and the experience of many other founders is that when you price actually at the value you think you're providing in line with the market and competitors, you actually end up winning more deals. And the reason for that is that if I came to you, I get to sell you my own product later. But if I came to you and I said, I'll give this to you for $10 and I'm a college student and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So that's one thing. And then the last thing I'll say about procurement is you have to understand that governments and schools don't want point solutions. And the product strategy at scale for basically 99% of, in particular, subscription software providers, but also for service providers of government and educational institutions, the product strategy all converges on one insight, which is that governments and schools want to buy one thing. They don't want to buy 15 things, right? If you look at why Palantir is an $150 billion company, it's an $150 billion company because they found this interesting insight, which is that DoD and other federal agencies, that they wanted to buy basically subscription software that had high security and that solved custom workflows. And for years, people thought Palantir was a services business and everything they built seemed to be completely custom. But if you look at what's happened with Palantir is that they ended up basically becoming the one-stop shop for many federal government enterprise workflow needs. When you're selling even to these schools or these governments, your product strategy, like what it was at CourseDog in the beginning, I was like, we're scheduling. Then one day I said, wait a second, what is it about scheduling? And I heard, wait, they're telling me they have frustrations with manual data entry, right? They're telling me they have frustrations with integration. And then I said, what are the other manual data entries and integrations that they're doing? And then we built that. One insight that, for those of you that have never heard Parker Conrad's Compound Startup lecture, is that I would highly encourage anyone in this market to really think through the idea of being a compound startup, of parallelizing and being smart about building a comprehensive solution-solving platform, not just a point solution, because ultimately the point solutions die. The growth rates fall off, the market isn't big enough. But if you have a broader platform, if you have a broader persona where you're trying to solve all of their products, that's where companies continue to compound, where companies like CourseDog or others that I've seen all of a sudden actually are able to re-accelerate growth because they're able to solve a larger problem for their buyer persona.
We have a couple of questions for you. One is on pricing. How did you get that pricing due diligence? Did buyers share with you the sort of like current costs? And secondly, how did you deal with the challenge of long sales cycles within higher ed? Did you find them to be long?
There's different stages of pricing. When you're 0 to 1, when you're really early, like no revenue, the best way to do it is to index on what is the premium solution in the market and basically be a copycat to that, right? Doing back of the napkin math is fine when you're at truly 0. As companies get their first couple of deals, it is really important to understand market pricing. It is important to understand how folks price by government population or FTE enrollment or whatever it is. I'm working on a new company, which works with about now 35 early stage companies predominantly that sell to government education. And we basically aggregate scaled pricing intelligence. So we can show you how your competitors are doing pricing. We can show you how they structure their contracts, things of that sort. Let me respond to this second question, Omar. You asked about the challenge of long sales cycles, the contract in hand in 9 to 12 months to get a pilot off the ground. Yeah, look, these markets are deeply misunderstood because of the long sales cycle. 9 to 12 months is not unusual, okay? And it's not actually a sign that anything is wrong, right? There are a ton of billion-dollar plus companies, Palantir, Tyler Tech, that have really long sales cycles. And inherently, and it's difficult for many folks that are not as smart as Caitlin, they don't understand that this long sales cycle and long time to implement, I always thought, in the back of my head as we scaled the company, I was like, man, this is why this business frickin' sucks. I was like, man, this is why I'm like, man, if I was doing some B2B, if I was doing Otter, if I was doing, like, I would sell the crap out of that thing every day. What I ended up learning is that you have to understand this is a feature, not a bug. You're going to have 10-year, 20-year, 30-year relationships with your customers as a result of that phenomenon, right? The way that you should think about this is a lot of investors aren't going to understand it. But what I can tell you is that if you get over that 9 to 12 month sales cycle, if you have a true mid-market or enterprise purchase of whatever it is you're providing to just one of these governments or educational institutions, you've got a real company, right? Because if one will buy when they don't have any references, I guarantee a lot of them will buy, right? Omar, the other thing I'll say is be thoughtful about pilots. Sometimes pilots can be great, but sometimes they're actually something I think a lot of folks misunderstand is it's this thing of like governments and schools take oftentimes long times to get services deployed, whatever it is, whether it's software or whether it's a service or whatever it is. And the only real way to create momentum is to have them pay. And by the way, if they don't pay, you run the risk, you're going to wait that 9 to 12 months. They're going to sign the contract. And then they're going to say, we had turnover, or we had this, or we had that. And now we're not going to be able to do it. So keep in mind, investors, if you're like, hey, I just want to get the pilot so I can get my seed round. I get that. But I would say that more often than not, I see companies offering these pilots as a mistake because they actually shoot themselves in the foot later when things get hard. and they really need that customer or that person to be more of a design partner. And the only way to have a true design partner, in my experience in government or education, is when someone, in the same way that you have your ass on the line building this company, you need someone on their side to have their ass on the line, right? And if they didn't pay any money, they don't have their ass on the line. That's just the truth. You're just a guy that they like, a woman that they like.
I have a question. Would you take one fantastic paying customer over 5 pilot design partners?
I think it depends on the specifics. I think that pilot, you have to understand that most of the time changing things in a bureaucracy, like companies are like, we built the whole product for this government or this school in 3 months. It works. It's great. Wait till you have the data. Wait till you understand the amount of inertia. And by the way, it's not through any fault of their own. The whole system, in the same way that you get frustrated with Congress, wait till you're staring these people in the face and they're like, we could start 2 months from now. We got other things going on. Like, it's unbelievable. And it's shocking, actually, how many blockers, and these are great people, by the way, that are behind, that you're ultimately working with. I'm not saying it's on them. I'm saying it's on the structure of these bureaucracies and the inertia. You really want to build something great with them, like, you need to have someone's ass on the line on the other side, right? If they don't have their ass on the line on the other side, when they send you the data and the data's shit and someone has turnover and they've got a crisis and they've got this and they got that, there's a difference between you being the priority and you being the fun pilot partnership, right? If you do a pilot, at least have it really clear how much money, which hopefully is a lot of money, they're going to be paying and what are the terms of conversion, right? That's really important. Let me also answer the question about point solutions and comprehensive. All product strategies in this market converge on solving a problem for a persona. And the problem for the persona is oftentimes a lot more pervasive than a point solution. If you go to the city manager and you help the city manager to write a staff memo, or you go to the provost and help them do a report, if you go deeper with them, they're all really frustrated because at the center of a lot of these governments and educational institutions is an ERP or an SIS that they're genuinely fairly frustrated with. You have to understand the experience for service providers that provide P solutions. There's a non-trivial cost every time a government or educational institution goes through procurement. You have to understand that's expensive on their time. It's frustrating. They have to go make requests. So in general, the ideal experience for them is, I'll solve all your problems. Let's get it done, right? And over time, I would highly recommend Parker Conrad's Compound Startup lecture. This is the model I generally recommend for companies in this space.
How did you think about hiring the right people on the revenue team? I assume the first sales, obviously they're founder led and you're very close to them, but how did you think about when you make that transition?
Yeah, of course. So I think that, one is, I think, super important in the early stages. The founders really have to be doing the sales, right? Something that is, again, challenging about working with larger enterprises is the number of features and functions and security compliances and things that you want is going to be a rabbit hole and you're always going to feel like, I cannot believe how much I have to do in terms of just satisfying my buyer's needs, right? And again, it's actually a function of the bureaucracy. Like, the bureaucracy actually creates the need for this kind of I do everything because it's inherently political. You have to satisfy everyone's needs, even if there's great 80-20 solutions, one is, I think it's really important to have the founders really close to the go-to-market brain sooner rather than later. In general, I'm not saying that there aren't companies that are product-led that are amazing in this space. In general, I've seen that the higher the percentage time post getting a couple of customers live, a founder spends on really honing the go-to-market engine, generally is quite correlated with the growth of a lot of the times, the truth is, go-to-market founders win. And they don't actually win because they are better at slicking their hair back and presenting a nice sales deck or communicating the ROI. They're actually better because they uncover buyer needs more clearly and the roadmap becomes directionally aligned with what customers need on a day-by-day basis. For Palantir, people for a long time, again, said they were a custom software thing. They built every feature and function customers could ever want. Everything was a giant consulting thing. And my experience is that most companies that get to some scale in this market will tell you they had to sign up for a lot of stuff. It's important to be thoughtful about product strategy, but that's just is a common thing. When you start hiring go-to-market people, I'd focus on demand gen first. I do think that having SDRs in this market, having people that will pick up the phone, do calls, write personalized emails. There's this new age kind of growth function, using a bunch of tools to hack together buyer intent and do really creative emails. And that stuff can be quite useful, right? Truthfully, I actually see a lot of companies underinvest in just like pure outbound kind of demand gen headcount. One last thing I'll say is a lot of the times the founders in these markets, they'll say, or revenue leaders in these markets, they'll say this kind of thing, which I said to myself at one point. I said, we have 5,000 buyers? I could email them all in one day. So it should just probably be me. Like I can do it, right? And maybe I have a little bit of marketing, a little bit of conference. Generally, I don't need a big go-to-market organization as I scale. And what I didn't understand about that was that I hear this about from a lot of vertical SaaS founders and vertical founders in general. But the insight that I ultimately realized is imagine tomorrow your calendar was clear and you woke up in a nice lush green field. You were in your CRM and all you could do was figure out how to get a customer. You could find a lot of ways. I bet you could show up at the conference. I bet you could send flyers. I bet you could do on-sites. And truth be told, this really works. So don't get on your high horse about being a one-stop shop or having to automate everything. You're going to need bodies at some point, and it's a lot better for you to have those bodies than to underinvest. Thank you for
When
sharing
did
the startup talk. Very good one.
This is a good question too. How do you create evangelists within the college ecosystem?
It's about being really close to your buyer. It's about delivering a lot of value, building great things for larger bureaucracies takes time. As in, if you build a consumer app for a very narrow pain point, it's quite likely that you can have some, they might not be coming back every day, but you could probably build an experience that people really love, right? The truth is that for most companies that get to some scale, you are going to be woefully undermatched on day one in terms of what features you need to support the whole enterprise, right? So it's important to think about what is the core need that you really solve for them right now, articulating clearly the roadmap and the vision, and getting them excited about that vision. They've got to be excited. These folks are really good earnest people, and they really actually love to buy into these visions and be evangelists if you let them. But the way you have to do that is you have to communicate the broader vision. You have to communicate the broader mission. You have to take them along with you, like a friend, like a team member, and have that kind of consistent updating cadence. Your product on day one, there's a really good chance it's going to suck. And that's okay, because if you are really building with them, you can help them a lot. A lot of these people, the vendors they work with are really shitty. Like a lot of you will have the experience. You probably have some competitor. You're like, I can't believe this thing exists. I can't believe they use this. It's important to make them feel like they're a part of that journey with you.
I want to get to that because I think that's such an important social mission that has a spotlight on it of how do we actually transition to the next generation of software. But before that, one question for you is, what do you recommend for founders to approach and navigate the venture capital and fundraising process? I know how hard. I'm a small fund. I have to pitch my fund to LPs. I know all the cynicism that is around ed tech and investing and selling it to higher ed. How do you overcome that inertia for most investors?
It's funny. I think that times are changing a little bit in that for those of you that saw YC's recent request for startups list, their top two were really around basically government and public sector. I think the times are changing a little bit. Informed investors will recognize that truthfully, some of the most profitable software companies in the world are GovTech, school services, Gov services companies. I think that there is a very tricky balance for a founder of striking the dichotomy between what is happening today and the larger vision that needs to be shared with investors. The truth of it is that in most investors' eyes, by default, whatever small, narrow pain point you're solving in government or in education on day one, if described 100% as is, without that future vision, is going to look like a dinky little bootstrap company. Unfortunately, for many investors, the default, right? What's really important for founders to do is stay laser focused on the stuff you need to solve that full problem for the customer today, but then be able to better articulate the wild unbelievable vision for how you could solve the broader problem for that persona in the future. Let me give you an example of how this happened in my own case. I went through YC in 2019. We were this company. We told everyone we were building class schedules for universities. I cannot explain to you how bored most investors looked when I described to them what it was that we did. And I remember I was on the phone with Michael Seibel one day, who was my partner at YC. He's an amazing, amazing guy. And he was like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "We do class schedules for universities." And he was like, "What's the biggest, baddest, shittiest thing that exists in the university? Just tell me what's the worst." And I was like, "It's the student information system." And he was like, "The student information system." And I was like, "Yeah, but we can't build it. That's way too much." He was like, "Well, who does this?" I was like, "Workday." He's Workday sucks. What do you mean? You're an SIS. And I swear to God, that day I was struggling to raise money. After YC, we were this weird company. We had a ton of revenue and the business was doing awesome, but nobody wanted to invest because they were like, "What the hell is this 20-year-old class scheduling company?" And we started going to investors and I really thought about it and I was like, okay, let's actually imagine that I was incredibly good at being a compound startup. And I really thought about it and I was like, yeah, I guess it's not a today thing. It's going to take a while to build. Palantir took 20 years to build, right? But I think we could be an SIS. And I think maybe we have the right to win it because we're providing a lot of value to our customers today, right? That day, I did another investor pitch and I was like, we're building this modular cloud student information system, starting with this piece, right? And here's how it trickles up. I swear it was like I turned a switch. It went from impossible to inevitable, like the whole company. To be fair, we never built a full student information system. I did actually think for a long time that we would be able to, but having that framework made us a lot more focused on building in parallel. It made that investor vision really palatable so that we were able to raise venture capital. It really was a switch flip. The best thing a founder can do is reflect on that big, bad thing that you have the right to win, that you can articulate that broader vision to investors. Also be thoughtful about the lessons from that big vision you can use to inform your product strategy today, but also being clear-eyed. Like, I wasn't like, oh, we're going to go build a financials product right now. Don't mistake what's actually happening on the ground with that investor vision, but use it to inform the product strategy and the build up to getting to that larger place that you want to go.
I think that is super important. I think the other thing that founders today can do is they can also articulate the success that you've had to selling to private equity. I know you're friends with Greg Scarsby at Campus Logic, like Furchman just also had an amazing exit. Like these exits to private equity are very significant, even though they're often undertold stories in the broader market of tech land.
100. And I think the last thing I'll say to a lot of folks is getting a good mentor like a Greg. There's some of these folks that in GovTech, like the open Gov, like there are some of these people that really understand the market deeply. And I think it can be really good to find someone to bounce ideas off of that deeply understands not just venture cap, someone who's been able to navigate that journey selling into these spaces can be incredibly invaluable.
Some of those people become investors and look for the next generation of awesome founders. And those are the people that you should be targeting top of your list. How did your experience at CourseDog lead you to Starbridge?
Yeah, for sure.
And what is Starbridge?
Yeah. So I think broadly through my time at CourseDog developed an enormous amount of frustration and empathy for how difficult it is as an SMB to do business with local government and educational institutions. I think there are so many, we didn't even talk about them yet. In addition to these tips that I gave you, there's so many weird things around how do you manage RFPs in public procurement? How do you understand buyer priorities from board meeting minutes and strategic plans and use them to figure out who's the right person to contact and when, right? How do you navigate using a reseller so that you can do contracting or do business in a state? There's just a lot of weird nuances around that. And for me, like from a mission perspective, I think it would be a beautiful world if more founders, if more small businesses actually looked at local government and education as the number one place that they could move so that not only they can build up a great business, but make a big impact in the world, right? So that led me to Starbridge. What I'm working on at Starbridge is building a go-to-market and contracting compliance platform for companies that work with educational institutions like K-12 higher ed and local government. The main thing I'll show folks today, first, anyone who wants to reach out to me, even just to get advice on what they're working on, talk about their go-to-market process, I'm more than happy to do that. Predominantly, we work with almost 40 businesses, mostly SMBs that are selling into these markets. And helping them with different things. So let me give you folks a 5-minute overview, and then I really would rather use the rest of the time just to go through questions if that's appropriate. High level, what we do at Starbridge is we help businesses that sell to local government and education to understand who their buyers are, what their priorities are, who to reach out to, and how to manage the public procurement process. The way that we do this is through 3 core products. One is that we aggregate buying signals. We actually aggregate competitor contracts through Freedom of Information Act, contract expiration dates. We mine for RFPs, board meeting minutes, strategic plans, and contact data, giving you really good data at your fingertips around who your buyers are, and it's the right way to get in touch with them. We do a lot of cool enrichment for those building personalized messaging or doing other things. We help enrich your data. We help companies manage the procurement process by completely automating end-to-end their RFP, security questionnaire, and public procurement process, even providing vehicles so businesses can avoid RFPs altogether. Let me give a super quick demo of the product, just 5 minutes, and then use the time for questions. Starbridge aggregates all of these buying signals on your buyers, right? So I'll give you a CourseDog example. We are able to get information on any active bids. Let's say, for example, I'm just trying to understand the market. I'm trying to understand the RFPs that are out there, or maybe I'm in the process of bidding on different RFPs. Starbridge has a really powerful kind of search where we have this existing database of these. And then we also automate the process of writing RFPs. We integrate with your company knowledge base, and we train basically a private LLM that automates this entire RFP process. For those of you that have ever filled out an RFP, we automate the whole end-to-end process of creating the outline, creating the compliance matrix, responding to the questions. You could do it right from the platform. You find an RFP, you write an RFP, you download it. For those of you that are just getting into RFPs, it will save you 95% of the time. In Starbridge, we aggregate competitor purchase and contract data. For public institutions and governments, data on purchases, contracts, and even competitor sales proposals are publicly available with Freedom of Information Act. This is an incredibly good way to hone down your pricing. What we actually do is we mine this information at scale and show you where your competitors are doing business, what's the price that they're doing that business for with that agency. And we also even show you the upcoming expiration date on those competitor contracts, which is really powerful. Last but not least, we also mine for board meeting minutes and strategic plans. If you want to monitor, for example, mentions of school construction or digital modernization, we have a feed for you. Go straight to your inbox where we'll show you any major updates in your market. Businesses can also use us to enrich their data, either in their CRM or for outbound purchases. We have a whole kind of extraction pipeline, which is really powerful, where you can take these documents and turn them into intelligence for account prioritization. For example, you could understand the accounts that are spending the most money on your process. You also can use this for the purpose of enriching. If you want to know product by product, what's the price that your competitor is charging, we can set up those whole enrichment workflows for you as well. I'll show you this final piece of an enrichment that I think is really powerful. One of the things we did at my last company, our sellers spent more than 60% of their time basically going through public documents like strategic plans, board meeting minutes, and using them to basically define outbound email snippets. And what we do is we have all these documents already in our platform. You can create custom email snippets that map exactly to the problem that government has that matches to your value proposition. I'll show you this really quick. Basically, what you're seeing here is that I pulled in a couple of example strategic plans from a couple of schools. You can see here that I said, hey, spit out why the software at Acme Inc. is a good fit, given the information provided. And what our system actually does is it'll spit out a little snippet that can be the first line of your outbound emails. For customers that have used this, generally it can increase your response rates by 33%. We've seen a lot of customers find and close outbound deals from doing this. You can actually automate this. So let's say it's a good fit, given the information provided. Note that we provide academic operations software. You learn how to use the tool, but basically what we have the ability to do is run these processing pipelines at scale so that you can really customize the kinds of automations that you want in terms of generating these snippets and ultimately use them to send outbound emails. I think that's the 5-minute demo that I wanted to show for today. 2 questions. Starbridge also helps with SBIR grants, RFPs. We totally do all of that as well. 100%. Anyone have questions? I know we went through a bunch. Feel free to ask specific questions about your own sales process, Starbridge questions, whatever's most helpful for you.
While people are thinking about their questions, maybe one for you. You've met a lot of founders, seen companies succeed and fail, gone through Y Combinator. How do you know in your gut when a company is going to be successful in this space?
That's a really good question. I think it's a combination of, from a founder perspective, the deep understanding of the buyer, honed through many conversations. The number one predictor for me is how many conversations they have in what period of time. A lot of the times people make a mistake and they don't have those conversations. I tell them, go have those conversations, and how quickly they go and have a lot of conversations and iterate is a really good sign. Number two, I think, is the founder's general characteristics. I think that, are they formidable? Are they intelligent? These kinds of things. And then from a market perspective, I think that the main thing that I'm usually looking for is, do they have one actual contract that matters? And then, are there characteristics about the space that can lead to a larger vision? I am less concerned with the larger vision. Like, I've made a lot of investments now in a lot of GovTech and EdTech companies, and every single one of them has done well. I'm not saying that to humble brag. I'm just saying it is, I actually can't think of a time when a founder landed an enterprise contract and didn't make some money. Like, it might not be huge, right? If you're in the weirdest corner of government education, it might not be huge, but it's like the most clear business model in the world. You're basically serving these customers for 15 years. If you got one, you're going to be able to get 10. It's not that outrageous to reason that if you have something. How do you approach continuous product improvement post-implementation? What systems or processes have you found effective to obtain recurring customer feedback? Obviously, it depends on stage, right? At early stage, I think that a mistake many early stage companies make is that product strategy doesn't exist unless you say what you're not going to do. A lot of founders are like, we're going to have the most modern product, we're going to have the best UX, and we're going to do the features, and we're going to be like, you need to be in this market when the number of feature requests and enterprise use cases will always be an order of magnitude more than you can handle. You need to, as a founder, have a controversial, almost argumentative take about what you are not going to do. I will give you an example, and I will say it is a very successful company that sold into both GovTech and EdTech. They made a business decision where they told their product managers they are not going to worry or spend any time on user experience design. When I heard that, I was like, that's crazy, right? But what this founder explained to me was that they had so many enterprise features that they need to build. And there were certain parts of the app that were in the back office that were set up one time that nobody touched ever again. And what's actually quite funny is, you might joke about and say, oh, all these SIS companies suck and all these ERP companies suck, like Tyler Tech or whatever it is. You have to understand the reason why they are billions of dollars companies, unfortunately, for better or for worse, is because they were really aggressive about building enterprise features. And what that meant was oftentimes a lot of thoughtlessness around back office, admin, workflows, experiences, user experience. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying Oracle and a lot of these ERP companies and SAP and the biggest companies in the world that sell the GovTech and EdTech oftentimes don't have the best user experiences. I'm not saying you shouldn't focus on your user experience. Oftentimes you need to be almost ridiculously opinionated about the things you are not going to do so that you can do the things that you want to do when there is inevitable and infinite requests going on, right? And truthfully, every company in this space, when they're doing enterprise or whether you're a service or a SaaS company, is woefully under feature on day one. Woefully, embarrassingly. So sometimes you need to say, here are the ones that are so needed. It is so embarrassing we don't do this, but also we can't do it right now because it's not important, right? And that would be my one piece of advice.
Awesome. There was a question about Canadian data on Starbridge. Do you have Canadian data?
We do. Yes, we do. We have RFP data and we have purchase data, that type of stuff. In Canada, there's one place where you could go find RFPs. So I don't know if there's as much of it depends on the workflow, but yes, we do have, it depends how useful it is in your stage in terms of how you, like whether or not I would recommend to use Starbridge for that. But definitely we have that data, and we do have customers that are actually predominantly, like we work with a company called Bounce, for example, that does most of its business in education and governments in Canada.
What KPIs are you tracking for go-to-market efficacy? How do you know that it works for your customer?
Oh, for us or for a general motion?
I guess for a general motion, but maybe also at CourseDog.
Yeah, at Starbridge, you could look at our website testimonials. Like, we have a bunch of customers that I thought about bringing on this that were like, holy shit, like I found and closed a deal. Holy shit, like I saved 90% of my time on RFPs. Holy shit, I totally redid my pricing because I understood my competitors. For how I would measure go-to-market efficiency, I would measure it like a normal. I don't think there's anything overly special about this market In terms of the KPIs I would be tracking, I would keep it simple in the early days. You want to understand what's your pipeline, what's your pipeline coverage, what are the things that are tracking, getting you to what are your different channels that are creating pipeline, what are the touches you're making, outbound, inbound. I'd have an SDR scorecard, an AE scorecard. I'd be looking at revenue, I'd be looking at revenue retention. So I don't have a great answer here. I think that these markets function from a KPI tracking and go to market more like normal companies that have a similar implementation challenge and similar average sales price. Some founders get too in a loop of, oh, this market's totally different. They go to one conference and they grab a beer with someone and then they landed their first contract and they get so obsessed with that. They're like, oh, I can't do cold outbound. I can't do calls. I can't do, it's almost like they get on their high horse about their idealism about vertical SaaS. And it's not, please don't have the whole bet of your company be about you reinventing some super crazy go-to-market motion, go-to-market motions or go-to-market motions.
Awesome. So there's another question. What is one non-obvious question to ask during a call with someone with purchasing power to truly understand the willingness to pay?
Non-obvious. My non-obvious answer is you should just ask them when they're going to buy the product and how much budget they have. I think that this stuff is, I think, again, the best framework early on is just be competitive with market and be even premium to market and then adjust from there. Jason Lemkin has a great article on SaaStr about doubling your pricing until people tell you to F off. It's better to price too high and negotiate down than it is for you to do it vice versa, right? I'll give you an example of a funny one. I quoted an early customer. We found out our competitor pricing was like 30 to 50K per year on our first product. And I quoted them at $625,000 per year. And they were like, what? No. And then I was like, actually, I could go lower. And they were like, okay. I would say high end of normal is the right framework. I think pricing is less important than do they want to actually buy the product. And the way I'd figure out if they'd want to buy the product is they're either buying the product or they're not buying the product. Don't convince yourself that they're buying the product if they're not literally telling you, I'm ready to buy this. I want to buy this product. I'm bringing it to procurement. You really need that. This isn't like, they're not, going to give you, like, there's no like hidden signals here. Like you should just be direct. Be bold. Yes. Bold. Exactly.
Maybe one last question for you. And this is big picture. Everything in investor land this year has been, what's your AI strategy? I know you use it in Starbridge, but I don't think you've really mentioned it often on this call. Like, what's your take on how AI is going to trickle into higher ed, government?
Yeah. So I think I'm not going to make general proclamations on AI. What I will do is I'll speak specific to these buyers, K-12, higher ed, local gov. I think that a very simple way to describe what is happening in these governments and educational institutions right now is, one, clearly AI to learning and teaching use cases, research on policies or other things, on drafting of documents, of other use cases of this sort has been highly disruptive, right? And the different markets really have different things. So in K-12, for example, all hell is broken loose. There's a million companies doing teaching and learning software with AI that are doing fantastic. And my advice to them would be go big, go platform, do the whole thing, because there's a lot of companies that are just building an AI bot for every use case. And truthfully, that is what schools are going to want to use, right? That would be my advice in K-12. In higher ed, it's a little more, there's some schools that have piloted, like in Arizona State, they've done ChatGPT Enterprise, and with learning integrity, there's some interesting use cases. I haven't seen any real, besides some stuff on the admission side, like breakout stuff yet. And I think that the areas that are most interesting is around basically how, in a horizontal use case, like how do you allow the universities to use these tools compliantly? A lot of why there's been enterprise adoption of LLMs at schools is actually around governance and legal risk. Like public institutions, if you put something in ChatGPT, it's available by FOIA. If you put student data into the model, they freak out. There's some interesting stuff horizontally around policy and governance. In terms of vertical specific applications, I would say admissions is learning and integrity. GovTech is actually pretty similar to higher ed in that the ones I'm seeing really get traction are the ones like there's a lot of Copilot. There's a lot of Copilot adoption in all of them, but in GovTech, there's been a lot specifically around how to create policies that gate these LLMs. But it's crapshoot right now. And I think it's just important to know, are the buyers going to pay for it? Or are you just slapping LLM on it because you want to raise money? And I don't see a lot, to be honest. K-12, where it's nutso, is great. Nothing else to me yet is fully there in terms of a crazy good LLM use case where there's going to be hyper.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation, super insightful. Thank you for being with us and sharing your experience. We will follow up via email for everyone, but you have Justin's email so you can contact him directly. Please join us for the next session, December 5th, with Susan Cates about metrics that matter. Thanks, everyone.